Superman the movie in 1978 changed everything we knew about superheroes in media. The only things that comic book heroes were known for in terms of the pop culture zeitgeist were TV shows like Adventures of Superman, Batman, and the Green Hornet, or film serials like Captain Marvel, Captain America, and Black Hawk, as well as plenty of others in regards to both, and of course, animation aimed at children. The film caused Superman to become even more popular and even more recognizable. While other heroes took a while to reach the silver screen, Superman started something incredibly important and spawned a new age of how comic book heroes would be showcased. With this, what if Superman wasn't the hero to make history and DC Comics wasn't the company behind it all? What if the most popular superhero of all time was the innovator? What if Spider-Man became the hero that caused everything? Well, I'm not sure how the rest of history would follow through, but I will showcase a world where Spider-Man in 1978 started everything. Now, in order for this to be a challenge to myself, I am not going to include any people from the original Superman production, nor the Amazing Spider-Man TV series, nor the canon films version that never happened. So you won't see a Richard Donner directed Spider-Man film starring Nicholas Hammond as Spider-Man with Katharine Hepburn as Aunt May. None of that. Now, there is pretty much no precedent for Spider-Man on film before the 1980s, but maybe on this world, instead of Ilya Salkind wanting to make a Superman film in 1973, maybe someone similar wanted to make a Spider-Man film instead, so that will be our jumping off point, where the same history happened, but instead of Ilya Salkind and Superman, it is another producer and Spider-Man. With this, production starts in 1974 on Spider-Man. Now, considering that the night that Gwen Stacy died just happened in the comics, I would imagine that that's what they would adapt for the film, since that was a big story, and having that would probably garner a lot of attention in movie form. Peter would be in college, so you could definitely get an older actor for the role, so let's get into specifics in terms of the characters and fan casting. First things first, we have our Peter Parker / Spider-Man. I did go through a bunch of names for Peter Parker. I wanted to go with someone that was enough of a name to hold a film, but not too well known where they would not do the movie because they think they're better than it or something. Since this would be a college Peter Parker, anybody in their 20s would have been fine. I mean, if Stockard Channing can play a high schooler at 34, then having a 20-something as a college student would not be a big fucking deal. With that, I chose Timothy Bottoms for the role, and he was mostly known for The Last Picture Show and The Paper Chase at the time. He would be in his mid to late 20s in the mid to late 1970s, so I think that worked. He has the look for it, and with the amount of great films he did in the 70s, I think having him be Spider-Man would have worked for that time. Then for Gwen Stacy, I ultimately decided on an actress who again would have been in some more noteworthy films, but still small enough to get away with being in the first real comic book movie. I chose Sissy Spacek, mainly because Gwen Stacy was a book-smart character. She was in tune with Peter Smart, and that's why a lot of people liked her at the time, and I think Spacek could do that very well. Then for Aunt May, I decided on the classic older actress that many were thinking about when trying to get this movie made, like with Zito's canon Spider-Man movie. I ultimately decided on Ann Southern. And then, of course, you would have Uncle Ben, but being shown in a flashback, played by William Demarest. Then for J. Jonah Jameson, even though it probably wouldn't have happened, I had to make it Stan Lee, because he always wanted to play the character but couldn't, so I decided to make him the character here, as he envisioned J. Jonah Jameson as essentially a grumpier version of himself. Then for the smaller supporting roles, I would have Harry Osborn, played by Tim Matheson, who wouldn't become known until Animal House, which would have come out the same year as this would have. But I think he kind of worked as the charismatic but kind of douchey character that Harry kind of was at the time. Then for Mary Jane, who would have a much smaller role in comparison to later films, she would be played by Nancy Allen. I think Allen could nail the beauty of the character, but also being that sassy and tough as nails character that Mary Jane was. I considered Anne Margaret, as that is who she was modeled after, but she was in her mid-30s at the time, and I think that would have been a bit too old. Although I am aware of the irony of having Carrie and Chris in the same movie once again. Then finally for the big bad, I have Green Goblin, as that makes sense considering he was the villain who killed Gwen Stacy and is Spider-Man's most popular villain, like with Luthor for Superman. I have him played by Robert Mitchum, since the Superman movie had such great talent, like Gene Hackman and Marlon Brando, so it wouldn't totally be out of nowhere to have such a huge actor like Mitchum be the main villain. Now for the crew, I have Peter Yates as the director. He was kind of a jack-of-all-trades director, and I feel like that could work for something like Spider-Man, as it combines many genres into one story. Then I have Alfred Bester as the screenwriter, who was one of the many writers considered for Superman, but he was a comic writer at one point and wrote many sci-fi stories, so I think that would be perfect for this, despite not being that well known. Then finally, I decided on Jerry Goldsmith for the composer. Since I said nobody from the original production, no John Williams. But considering I view Jerry Goldsmith as someone who was just as good as Williams, with how many amazing scores he did, but has not received as much limelight as the 93-year-old legend, I decided to use him here. But that is it for the first film in 1978. In terms of the characters that will be in all 4 films, we have Spider-Man, duh, Aunt May, Mary Jane, J. Jonah Jameson, and Harry Osborn. But with that, time for the sequels, which should be a bit easier. Next up is Spider-Man 2 in 1981. Now, I am slightly changing the date because in this world, the first 2 Spider-Man films would not be filming at the same time like the first 2 Superman films, so I gave it an extra year. In Superman 2, the main villain was someone of brute strength who was trying to find Superman in order for him to bend to his will and kill him. With that, I chose Kraven the Hunter as the main villain. Imagine the physical imposing strength of Non, but the intelligence of Zod. That's the vibe I'm going for with Kraven. Then for the Ursa character, I decided to use the recently created character at the time, Calypso. It would be cutting it close, but I think I could make it work. With this, Kraven the Hunter would be played by David Prowse. He did audition for Superman, but he was turned away because he was Scottish. But due to the physically imposing nature of the actor, I think he would do well here. Maybe not the greatest actor ever, but I think he could pull it off. Then for Calypso, she would be played by Tamara Dobson. Hot badass black actress, so I thought she would be good for the role. Then Peter Yates and Alfred Bester would return as director and screenwriter respectively, and Jerry Fielding would become the composer, as Jerry Goldsmith would have probably left to do more illustrious projects. Next, we have Spider-Man 3 in 1984. Following the slightly changed numbering, this would be released 3 years after the previous film. The villain I have this time is Mysterio, because the villain in Superman 3 was like tech involved, and I think a major Spider-Man villain that would be close to that would be Mysterio. I could use Tinkerer, but he isn't as big of a villain. He would be played by Gene Wilder, Richard Pryor in the actual film, and so I thought it would be funny to have Wilder be the villain here. Plus, in the era of campy superheroes, I think Wilder could make that character work. Then, since Lois Lane in Superman 3 had such a small role and was sort of replaced by Lana Lang, I thought to include Black Cat as a quote-unquote alternate love interest, or at least someone to entice Spider-Man. Black Cat would be played by Bo Derek, stone cold haughty and didn't exactly need to be the best actress in the world, just kind of there to be hot. Yes, I am aware Black Cat is a more complicated character than that, but again, this is the 80s. They didn't really care about that kind of thing at this point. The director would then become Irwin Allen, who was known for the action sequences of movies like Towering Inferno, so his action style would be applicable here. Then the screenwriter would become Lorenzo Semple Jr., who was known for B movies during the 70s and 80s. Finally, Jerry Fielding would return as composer. Finally, I have Spider-Man 4 in 1987. Here, the timing worked, so I used it. No subtitle for the film because I simply could not think of one. Since in Superman 4, Luthor came back, I decided on Kingpin as one of the villains because Luthor and Kingpin are somewhat similar. I think a perfect and bombastic choice for Kingpin would be Brian Blessed. I think he would have definitely nailed it. Then for the second villain, I ultimately decided on Hobgoblin, as he was a newer villain at the time, so they could use him. He would be played by Kurtwood Smith, good at playing sleazy and slimy bad guys. RoboCop, coming out that same year, would be a fine example of this. Ironic, since Allen would also be in RoboCop. Then Since this would be a canon film, much like Superman 4 was, the director would be Albert Pune, who was going to maybe direct Superman 5 if canon didn't go bankrupt and the rights didn't revert back to the Salkinds. And as I said, even though we did almost get a canon Spider-Man film, I chose not to use Joseph Zito to stay away from the comparisons, as well as my initial challenge. The screenwriter would be James Bruner, and then the composer would be Frank Duvall. While it may have continued differently than Superman did in our world, and it is entirely possible that we would have gotten more movies, or Marvel being the reigning champs of the big screen, for now we just have these 4 films to look at. It more or less became what if Spider-Man had movies in the 70s and 80s, but it was still a fun premise to do anyhow. Maybe I can do a follow-up on the world this created, but for now, just a flip to a Marvel character. See y'all next time for another video.